Legislative chapter at the Texas Capitol has now closed. State lawmakers are heading home after wrapping up their work yesterday at the 89th regular legislative session. Governor Greg Abbott is also hitting the road today, but to sign off on one of his main priorities this session, he'll be signing that into law.
He'll hold a bill signing event in Houston this afternoon for stricter bail measures meant to keep people accused of violent crimes behind bars. We're joined this afternoon by two former state lawmakers to talk about what else lies ahead in Texas politics. Dennis Bonnen is a former House Speaker who represented Southeast Texas, while Mark Strama previously served as a Democratic state representative here in the Austin area. Dennis and Mark, welcome back to you both. This is a big moment. We've been having you all join us since the very beginning of session, so we appreciate you taking the time today.
Absolutely.
All right, I want to zoom out first before we talk a little bit more about some other things. What is it that you think this session will be remembered for moving forward?
Open-ended question. I got that question from a Dallas Morning News reporter yesterday. I said, largely a good session for Republicans, not a great session for Democrats, which is what you'd expect when you have a big majority of Republicans in both houses. I guess what I should have also said was, it was a good session for culture war. I mean, there was just, Dennis has made the point that the state has already moved pretty far to the right on so many of the biggest issues. What's left is often fairly marginal and often kind of just pure red meat, and sometimes red meat without a whole lot of substantive significance to public policy. But still, for Democrats, it's hard to take those losses, and I don't know what the fun is in it for Republicans, but I guess you got to deliver something.
Well, you got to respond to the base in your primary, but I slightly disagree. I think the takeaway from the session is several things. One, for the first time in the history of the Texas legislature, you had a speaker elected without a speaker statute. Therefore, outside influence, outside dollars, millions of them attacked those in the speaker's race, particularly Speaker Burrows, who won. I've never seen a speaker in 30 years not know they're going to be speaker until that vote's taken on opening day. That's pretty extraordinary. And then Dan Patrick was rather adamant in his opposition to Speaker Burrows. And you sit here today, and Dan Patrick will tell you that Speaker Burrows was a great partner, was wonderful to work with, and I think the House and the Senate and the governor achieved a lot of great things together. And I think that you saw, not to pat myself on the back, what went back to 2019 when I was Speaker, which was a positive, collaborative relationship between the governor, lieutenant governor, and the Speaker. And that's what you should have when all three are from the same party. And so I think what you found, and there's some criticism of, the House didn't stand up enough to the Senate. I mean, that's just for those who wanted more angst and more anger. The reality of it is, when you agree, there's nothing to fight each other over. And there are some internal battles that I think the House won. There are internal battles that the Senate won. But what you found was a very positive collaborative relationship between the three state leaders in the two chambers. And I think that's very significant, because when that happens, bigger, better things occur. Mark talked about the culture wars. I understand why he would say that. But I think that when everyone's agreeing on paying teachers more, when everyone's agreeing on school finance reform, those don't get as big of a headline. They got headlines, they definitely did, but they don't get as big of a headline because they're not this battle. And they weren't a battle between parties, and they weren't a battle between chambers, quite candidly.
Yeah, we saw a lot more pictures being posted between the big three leaders of them meeting behind the scenes. Didn't really happen in 2023, so that, as you noticed, is a big change. But I'd like you to respond to what Mark said. I mean, we didn't really talk much about culture war issues during our conversations throughout the session, so what do you think really is the goal with doing that?
Look, the problem is that, and I say this with respect, if the Democrats had been in the majority for the last 20 years, they would have to find things that their base of their party wants them to say they passed and wants them to say they did. The problem the Republicans have is we've been in charge for 20 years, so we have eliminated a lot of the ills that people found from a conservative social basis. And so you are, to Mark's point, you are having to find you're at the bottom of the bushel. It's do I really want to eat that piece of fruit or not, because it's not the freshest, it's not the best. But that stuff's been gone. I mean, that stuff's been handled, and it is a bit of a problem, to be truthful, because no one appreciates what you did yesterday. They want to know what you did for them today. Problem is, what they've done is significant.
And there's a whole industry built on manufacturing outrage that we haven't gone far enough. So people, in fairness to the leadership of Dennis's party, they're constantly being pulled further and further toward the extreme. as I'm sure you would say, Democrats are
absolutely. It goes both directions
in their primaries.
Yeah.
You said
y'all just aren't winning, so it's not as flagrant from your perspective.
I mean, fair.
No, I don't mean that.
I know.
Picking at you.
But
you're not.
But
winning.
you started by saying you've got to have something to
That
campaign on in your primaries, and I've
All right,
said
here
it.
he goes. Get ready. Here he goes.
Here it comes again.
Here it comes.
But look, when the legislature takes an unpopular position on THC, when it takes an unpopular position on requiring the 10 Commandments in kindergarten classrooms, when it takes unpopular positions on Medicaid expansion and abortion, when Democrats take unpopular positions on the bail issues,
on bail, on
they
border, on a lot of these issues,
right.
yeah.
All of it comes down to the same root problem, which is that nearly every politician in the state, they're elected in a primary by a tiny sliver of the electorate of the most extreme voters, rather than being accountable to the general election voters who represent a majority of Texans. Everything we don't like about the outcomes we get in the Capitol goes back to that root cause.
But let's not forget, and I'm not dismissing what Mark's saying. He is very fair in what he's saying. But those are also the things we talk about. I mean, they passed 1,000 bills. They did a lot of nuts and bolts, do good things for the community I represent, take care of the problem in my local community, take care of big problems, school finance, education, paying teachers. The problem is we don't go to war over those issues, so we sit and say, well, it's the culture wars. Is it? Yes, they're there, but that is not the dominance of the session. Now, it's the dominance of the debate on the floor because, to Mark's point, the Democrats have to tear the paint off the walls and the Republicans have to say, hell no, you're not, and get it done. So it seems bigger, it seems louder, it seems more profound, when in reality, those are the things that are happening that we see while they then pass 50 bills in the next several hours that do things to help Texans and help people represent their district.
Yeah. Anybody who spends time in the building is stunned by the amount of responsible policymaking and responsible politicking that happens because it's not what gets coverage. I'll tell you another example. You talked about it. They passed 1,000 bills, most of them bipartisan. They also killed a lot of the right bills.
Sure.
And you might not agree with me on this one, but there was some bad legislation that would have curbed the renewable energy industry in Texas that has been a flourishing and prosperous driver of economic success in Texas while also making our air cleaner. And there were some bad bills, and I thought they were going to pass because they were popular with Republican primary voters, and so I thought that the politics aligned on their side. You know, we talked a lot throughout the session about process and timing, and I don't know exactly how those bills died, but I think responsible policymaking prevailed on some of them.
When you have the chair of the committee that those bills go through from West Texas, that may have something to do with it.
Right.
And by the way, that's important to know. He represented his district.
That's right.
And I think, and no offense, Mark, but that's, I think, one of the takeaways from this session. I think people did their jobs, period. And they did it well.
I do want to ask you all very quickly here, because we do want to get to a few things that are on the governor's desk before we go, but what are some of those things? You mentioned school finance, teacher pay raises. Obviously, education was a huge focus this session, but what are some other quick things that you think our viewers at home, responsible policy making, that may have flown under the radar that you don't think our viewers may have seen a headline about?
I think bail reform they got to hear about, but I mean, that's a huge issue, and that's a bipartisan issue. And that changes people's lives. I mean, that protects our citizens more than they were before. I think that you look at nuclear, significant things got passed on nuclear. Again, Governor Abbott led, the House and Senate went with him on chips. I mean, we're sitting here in a new technology hub for America. And you have Samsung out there in Taylor, Texas, in our viewing area. I mean, there was $250 million put into chips again this session. Space, they passed another bill on space. SpaceX, in those efforts, they're trying to turn Texas into bigger than anywhere in the nation for space exploration and the future of space with public-private partnerships. I mean, those are change your state forever opportunities and situations that this legislature took the lead on. Nuclear, he talks about renewables. Nuclear is phenomenal in that regard. You're talking about doing the things on the chips. You're doing the things on space. You're doing all these great things. And people aren't talking as much about it. Water, I forgot. Oh, God bless me for that. Water.
I mean, an example of when they
I mean, that is nuts and bolts take care of your people and your economy and your future.
Yeah, good bipartisan policy making on water. In the last 24 hours of session, there was a frenzy to try to address judicial pay.
Right.
I serve on the Texas Ethics Commission. We got stuck with the,
Good luck,
we got
baby.
stuck holding the ball.
It's yours now.
But you know, the politicians are trying to find a way to responsibly compensate judges for their service while not appearing to crassly be trying to enrich themselves in their retirement, because judicial pay increases actually drive an increase to legislators' pensions. So that was a, you know, and they found a way
I want
out.
to put color on that, because
Yeah, sure.
that's always offended me. You know, I got asked at the Lions Club in Freeport one time, you know, well, you're so enriched with your retirement. And I said, let me ask you this. Would you do a job for $600 a month for 12 years to get a pension that isn't very high? Because if you would, you're stupid. And I don't want you in charge of my state legislature. I don't want you in charge of my budget. I don't want you in charge of any of those things. So I want to be clear, they did need to delink from a judicial pay raise, and they did it. But in fairness to people who I've served with, and many I haven't that are there now, no one is getting the last several years I was in the legislature, I wrote a personal check to cover the cost of my family's insurance. I didn't get $1, but I got insurance, but I didn't get $1 back from Texas. Not complaining, I signed up willing to do that. But to then attack an elected official because, well, you get this pension. Let me be clear, pension, we'll take it, but it's not that amazing, and I could have made a lot more money for my family in my retirement if I didn't do $600 a month.
Honestly,
And I'm not complaining, but they shouldn't attack them.
Well, it's another example of I don't think any politician ought to be afraid to vote for that.
I would agree, but then they get hammered.
But they are. Well,
there were people in the last primary who'd never voted for it
Again,
and were accused of having done so. And again, though, I don't want someone who thinks that a 12-year, $600 a month job is a smart financial proposition. I don't want them in office. And I'm tired of people attacking people because they give a judge a pay raise that they deserve. Somehow they improve their pension.
I'm sure we've
Now, they
overstayed our
delinked it.
welcome here. But let me just close it with this, since we've had a long 5 months analyzing this stuff. I just said that there's a lot of responsible policy making that happens under the dome, and there is. And I said that the system is completely perverted by every politician's accountability to primaries. The responsible policy making is their instinct. You don't take a $600 a month job generally if you're not highly motivated to do the right thing or to at least serve the public.
That's right.
What happens though, and you hear members say this, is they're trapped by a political system where they have to get reelected in a primary accountable to a tiny sliver of the voters. They walk around apologizing to each other for the fact that they don't have the ability to do the responsible thing sometimes because they are accountable in this primary where the electorate doesn't represent the general feeling of most Texans. That's the problem we have to solve.
And I want to be clear, that's fair. But it goes both directions. I mean,
I'm not saying it
you
doesn't.
sit and watch that floor and you go, why is that member yelling at the back mic all afternoon? And it's because they're performing for their primary and the person at the front mic is performing for theirs.
It's
So
100%
fair
true.
point, but it is perverting both sides.
That's right.
Well, we will be entering primary season very, very soon, maybe even as early as this week in some cases. But
We'll start hearing.
Dennis and Mark, we appreciate you all both for making time for all of us to understand process and give your opinions and analysis of certain bills and laws that we are going to see. But we are very much looking forward to you all coming back and keep providing that for us. So thank you both again.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, everybody, we have in-depth coverage of the legislative session online right now at KXAN.com. Find a breakdown of bills our KXAN investigation sparked and what came of those and what else is moving to the governor's desk. We'll be right back after this with a look at your weather.